Hey, welcome back to the How to Podcast series. Dave here with you. I have a co-host today, Michael. Fritzius is with me. Fritz, we like to call him. Michael is here, and he's going to be joining us from a very amazing studio. It's not even a home studio. You'll hear more later. And for all of those podcast gurus who might be checking out my podcast, welcome, by the way. Nice to have you here. Michael is using a Blue Yeti. Ooh. Yeah, and his studio and his setup and even his Blue Yeti sounds awesome. I know. So all those people who throw shade on people with an interesting setup and using a Blue Yeti, take note that Michael is doing it and doing it so well. Here is the promo for his podcast. And you will find it the Third Wave with Fritz. And his website is podcastify.me. All the links in the show notes. But here you go. Here is Fritz, Michael, and his intro to his podcast. I thought I'd share with you before we jump in. Here you go.
If you're a coach, you probably got started because you have a big spark to impact the lives of others. Maybe you had some major trauma that thrust you on this path. Or maybe your superpower has given you some amazing success, and you want to replicate that in others. However you got here, though, if you're running a coaching practice, there's one thing that you have to master in order to keep your business going and keep serving people. Finding leads. Fortunately, you have a secret weapon. The podcast, a medium that everybody knows about by now, can be the single best way to attract leads and build amazing relationships. It's evolved from being simply another form of broadcasting and from being just another form of content. Now, this third wave of podcasting has it poised to be one of the best ways to knit the hearts and minds of your best clients to you. That builds the kind of relationships that lead to people wanting to work with you. And those relationships can be built in record time. If you're a coach, there's no better time to hop on this wave than now. I'm your host, Fritz, and you're listening to The Third Wave with Fritz. Let's dive
in. There we go. Welcome to the How to Podcast series. I have a guest joining me, and this should be interesting. He's joining me from his amazing studio. When you talk studios, you're thinking, oh my gosh, like this posh with leather couches, having like a cappuccino machine in the corner. You have like a nice mood lighting. Oh yeah. But this guest has more than that. This guest has got wheels. Yeah. He's got wheels. So, Michael, welcome to the How to Podcast series. My co-host for today. Welcome. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. It's a beautiful day for a podcast.
Come on. That's amazing.
That's all I got. I only have the one stanza, man. That's it. I didn't think this far ahead. I didn't think I'd get here. I should make a whole song, is what you're telling me? Like theme song. Yes.
You should. And you have a very talented daughter, which we'll talk about in the future here in the podcast, but coming up with something great, a great idea. We might want to plug this, and maybe we'll just blow this up. This is great. Welcome. And you're joining me from your studio. And as I alluded to, it has wheels. Can you please explain to the listeners? The viewers are like, what a great background. But for the listeners,
what a great background.
Where are you right now?
Yeah, so I'm at Studio 150 in St. Louis, Missouri. And Studio 150 is actually a Ford F-150 crew cab. So I have a little bit more room in the back seat. But for the listeners, and I'm not going to like move the camera around and stuff, but I've got the middle console flipped down. I've got my laptop sitting at the end of the console. I got my microphone right here, like a thumbsuck away from my mouth. I got the camera, but it's just me in the seats. All this upholstery just eats up all this extra sound. It really does sound like I'm in an actual sexy studio, like what you mentioned. Like, I got people bringing me tea and stuff, and I got people, rubbing my feet and stuff. I don't have that. It's a truck, dude. That's the secret. Podcasting on a budget 101, ladies and gentlemen.
Rubbing your feet? I have never thought of having somebody rub my feet.
You got to pay premium for that. You got to pay premium.
Okay, did you stumble into the studio, or did this happen by accident, or was this planned?
No, this was planned, dude. Seriously.
Oh, wow.
So the first one, it was by necessity, to be honest. So you mentioned one talented daughter. I have 4 talented daughters. And back when I got started podcasting in July 2019, it was like, man, they were noisy. I mean, and this microphone picks up everything, but I did my first few episodes in our bedroom, and the door was opening, and they were bonking around on our out-of-tune piano, and it's like, I have got to get in a quieter place, because you'd have to have, like, a double doctorate in audio engineering to edit that stuff out. I don't have that. I got to find someplace quieter. So I'm like, I know, the truck is just sitting there, and the Wi-Fi router's right on the other side of the wall. I'm like, I don't see how this plan can fail. So, yeah, came out here, man. It's great. It's really cold in the winter and really hot in the summer, too, dude. It is not climate controlled at all.
Wow. Okay, so this is amazing. And for those listening at home and watching this as well, you're using the mic that people love to hate, and you sound amazing on this mic.
People love to hate this mic? What do they have to say about the Blue Yeti microphone?
No, what's wrong? Oh, it's not the famous one, and blah, blah, blah. And it's all about the tech, and not about the content. You know that, those people.
I do.
I love your mic. You sound amazing. And you're right. The truck sounds fabulous. You're blowing away all of the regular guru comments about how to set up a podcast studio. You're just blowing it up. I love it. And you can just drive away if you want too, right?
I could. It gets awful gas mileage, this podcast studio. It's terrible.
I love it. Michael, you are so inspiring already. This is great. So if you're listening to this and you're like, there's no way he's using a Blue Yeti. Yes. And he's doing it like a boss. And I think you'd sound great. So again, welcome to the How to Podcast series. The idea behind this podcast is to encourage podcasters around the world to share your message. Do it with the resources you have. Great example, having you here, Michael. Do it with the resources you have, and don't let things stop you from sharing your message. I think that's the most important thing. There's so many people afraid to start, Michael, and they're nervous. They don't have the right microphone. They don't have the right lighting. They don't have the right whatever, but their message could help somebody. So let's start off with that, Michael. What are you seeing in podcasting that's exciting to you? And my dog barks as we talk. What do you see in podcasting that's exciting to you, and why did you start this?
Well, so I started podcasting. It was really, honestly, and I know that for the folks at home listening to this, they're like, this is really going to tart up your first impression of me if you've never met me before. It was really a vanity thing. I thought, I've got all this wisdom in my head bonking around. The world needs to hear this. And I've got a microphone. I'm the guy. And I started off, it was just me. It was opining on different things. I'd spend like 20 minutes talking about, people that job hop, that kind of thing. It's like, why is that a bad thing? Or the power of a thank you in a corporate environment. And after, I know there's like a 7th episode slump, but my slump happened at like 4. And I'm like, this sucks. Nobody's listening to this. Not even my mom, because she doesn't have the internet. She's not even listening to this. And eventually one of my good friends who's from Germany, Luca, he's like, hey, I saw that you have a podcast. Are you taking guests for your show? And I'm like, I guess I could. Are you asking for a friend? He's like, yeah, it's me. So he was my first guest in my first season. He was my last guest in my first season too. So he was the opener and the closer. And from there, I found this out accidentally and then realized, hey, this is something I need to really lean into. And I realized that podcast, the first one I started, was an amazing way for me to build a very powerful network of people that I never would have met in a million years if I didn't have a show. And so it went from just being like I just gotta get a place to brain dump and hopefully somebody hears it, to being, hey, I'm meeting some awesome people and I'm learning a lot about the world around me. I'm being exposed to different personalities that it's enriching me selfishly, but I'm also able to mutually impact their lives too. So I'm like, Well, now I can't stop because it's like it's a freaking dopamine machine, right? And over the years, you develop this, you develop a skill. I mean, the more you do it, the more you podcast, the better you get at talking in general. Like, there's flavor, and there's flow, and there's tone, and there's speed and slow, and it's like, wow, this guy's really, I've had more than one person I've had a few people tell me I've got a face for radio, and then I'm like, thanks, hey, but then I've had more people telling me lately, you've got a voice for podcasting. I'm like, how the heck did that happen? I guess just from practicing podcasting, I guess. But it's led me into some public speaking opportunities. So, yeah, that's how it got started. It and yeah, like the other part of the question, what I've noticed is it is an amazing way to build deep relationships with people. That's the trend. I think that's really the trend overall. People are using it like way above than just having it be a source of content. It's a source of meeting awesome people. Yeah.
I love making connections with people and learning. I think that's the one thing for me. I tell guests quite often that come on some of my other podcasts that when I'm done talking with them, I feel like I have to run around the block. I got this pent up energy from hearing a great conversation. And I'm like, I'm sure my neighbors think I'm crazy, but there goes Dave running down the street,
Yeah.
I don't have a Studio 150 yet. That's on my list.
Yeah.
But
He must have had a guest.
Was that another guest? There's Dave
guest.
again. There's that podcast guy. So I just love unpacking a story with somebody. And I guess one of the things from an interview perspective that I like to do, and one of the questions I ask in my pre-interviews with my guests is, what do you want to talk about that you haven't talked about already? Because I noticed you've been on X number of podcasts and you've kind of built a library of content around this part of your story. But what have you not talked about yet? What have you not gone deeper on that you'd love to expound on? And by me asking that, I'm basically saying, how can I create a podcast that you want to share? Without saying to them, hey, Michael, will you please share this podcast? Because if I create a podcast that you just love, and we had a great conversation, and you got to talk about something that your audience has never heard you talk about, the likelihood of you sharing without me even asking is pretty high, because you walked away going, that was awesome, right? And all you have to do is ask. And it helps you shape your content. It helps you shape your question. And you get to go and you get to see them unpack and kind of expose a part of themselves to their own community. And you get to see the pride in them going, right, that was a great episode. That was really fun. So any tricks for you on how you format your podcast and how you approach, like you mentioned your interview, but anything that you're learning about interviewing at all?
Ooh, what I am learning about interviewing really gets into psychoanalyzing people. Like, there's a reason why some shows really take off, and it's not technical, it's not nerdy, it's very human-centric, it's very squishy. And I did not go to school for that. I did not go to school to major in sociology or psychology. I majored in computer science, and so it's been a heck of a mind job for me, for sure, but what I'm learning is connecting with people at a really deep level and making it super easy for people to consume the content. It comes down to how do you make it simple for people to decide to go hear the rest? And what is it about a show that will make them want to hear the rest of the interview, right? And so I guess for some of the people that are listening, if they're podcasters already and it's like, well, how come people are pulling these fat numbers, like a huge number of downloads, and I got like 3? Well, I had that at the start too, and it was because I would go on LinkedIn and go on Facebook and say, hey, new episode's up, here's a link. And it's like, I mean, I know what's in there because I did the show. But for everybody else who wasn't me or the guest, they have no idea. They don't know. And breaking that barrier down and saying, okay, well, how about a 30-second clip of the show? You can hear a little 30-second clip. And it gets people to stop and listen, especially if you put little animations on the clip and make it like, ooh, what's that? What's that? Like, what was that? And they'll stop and they'll listen and they'll think, well, that did sound pretty cool. That sounded really cool. I think I'm going to go hear the rest. I did that for a bit, and the listenership jumped. I had that first podcast I started, the one where I did it in the house and was like, no, I need a better place. I'll do it in my truck. And I started a brand new show. From the outset, I was doing that. I was doing a little teaser thing, and the listenership jumped. But what, and I've said that on shows previously, but what I haven't said is the ability for a podcaster to be very successful in building listenership quickly. It's almost like you have to hack people's brains to get them to listen to the show. Like there are different patterns that all of us as humans have got. We have got pre-programmed synapses in our heads, in our brains, that will activate when it's presented with a certain set of stimuli. And if you can tap into that and understand that, yes, all of us, every single human, we've got this pre-programming in our heads. You can tap into that. And honestly, just between you and me, Dave, you can exploit the heck out of that and build your listenership. And I hate to say this, but I had to make this realization myself. We're lazy. Our brains are wired up to be lazy, man. Even yours. And I mean no disrespect. I love you, bud. But our brains are very well-tuned pattern recognition machines, and they are addicted to dopamine. And if you can make it easy for people to make a decision, and that decision happens to be, I'm going to go hear this guy's podcast, you will get listenership out the wazoo. And very few people have mastered this. I haven't mastered it. I know I'm acting like, I've got this figured out. It's like, no, I'm barely scratching the surface. The people that are really gonna clean house, man, if anthropologists got on and started making podcasts, they'd be like, holy crap, they are getting like Joe Rogan numbers in a very short amount of time. And that's why, because they know how the human mind operates. So it's a very squishy thing. But for the budding podcasters out there, beef up. Don't read books on podcasting just yet. Read books. Just consume as much content about the human condition. Atomic Habits is a good one. The like switch is a good one. Anything that has to do with how do you get people to know, like, and trust you a lot faster, where it's like, why the heck do I like this guy so much? There are ways to do that. And if you incorporate those skills and tricks in your podcast, gonna be a force of nature, man.
And it's that's
scary. I feel like it's illegal to be saying this kind of stuff on your show, man. But yeah,
warning:
don't say that. Edit that part out.
The warning: the following will inspire you. Yes, exactly. It's like a locomotive. Right. It's like a locomotive, right? It just takes so long to get started, and it's like, will this train ever go anywhere? Like, oh my gosh, I can walk faster. But they have a cow catcher on the front because it can't stop, right? It just pushes the cows off the road, like off the tracks. Like, get out of the way. I can't stop. So that's what a podcast is. It's just this big, clunky locomotive. And I think a lot of people want to have a Lamborghini podcast that just hit the button and you're instantly fast. And I think it's a problem that we fall into is we like the instantaneousness of having things happen now. And a podcast that's going to have longevity and build an audience and community is a locomotive. It's going to take time.
Yeah.
But once it's rolling, you better get out of the way because it's just going to, go and it's going to go well. So start now.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, I think right now, not to push back on what you just said, you're right. The way that technology is these days, I'm finding too that there's certain, like, I think everybody's got a certain love language when it comes to communication. There's like the 5 love languages. There's physical touch, words of affirmation, acts of service, and then the other 2, which I can never remember because they're not mine. Mine's physical touch. But the other 2, whatever they are. But when it comes to communication, like, there's certain reasons why people gravitate toward podcasts, and there's certain reasons why people gravitate toward TikTok or Facebook Reels or email or books or articles or something. It's like there's something that they like about that kind of content. But these days, you can take a podcast and you can chop it up into small pieces and put it on TikTok. Those teasers I mentioned before, if you take those, like a 30-second clip, and you put that on TikTok, then you're going to have that group where they're like, man, this is amazing, yeah. Well, then the next stop is, if 10% of people that really like every time they see your stuff and they poke the heart button, what if some of them visit your profile? What if some of them visit your profile and you've got a link to a link tree? What if the link on the link tree includes a link to your podcast? What if it's got a link to your business? What if it's got a link to where they can buy t-shirts? Like, I listened to the podcast and all I got was a stupid t-shirt, and they buy a t-shirt, right? You can link different forms of communication together and funnel people in. So yeah, I know a lot of podcasts that seems like it takes a while to get going. It takes a long time to get a really rock solid community built, but you can attract a lot of clout in a hurry by leveraging other platforms to get at least some more visibility on your show. You'll get the quick dopamine hit people that are like, gimme, huh! And then you'll get the other people that come along and they're like, I'm just going to sit and chill and listen to this guy for 60 minutes and it's going to be great. Got my wine or coffee or whatever. Got somebody rubbing my feet. It's kind of, yeah. That's a recurring theme. I know I may seem like I got a feet thing. I promise I don't, because I said that twice now. So this dude's got a foot fetish. I don't. I'm making a terrible first impression on your listeners today. This dude's weird. Where did he find this guy? I don't know.
I know, right? He was in his truck. He was on the side of the road, and I'm like,
never
you should
left,
be on my
man.
podcast. And he's like, yeah, I love it.
Let's do it. I live here.
Okay. It's great. Okay, so Michael, tell me a little bit about a podcast that inspires you. Is there something that you listen to and you're like, man, there's something about this podcast that I connect with as a listener, and I come back and I enjoy the content. What is it for you?
It doesn't inspire me, man, but I get a kick out of listening to Two Bears, One Cave. Have you ever heard those guys?
I am writing this down. Two Bears, One Cave?
Write this down, yeah. So it's a couple guys. They're sizable guys. It's Bert Kreischer and Tom Segura. They're a couple of stand-up comedians, and they both have, wild stories about how they got to where they are, but they get together in this studio, and they just do some of the stupidest and yet funniest stuff. And when they really get going, the guy who runs the sound booth, you can hear him laughing hard in the sound booth. Like it's muted and stuff, but you just hear him back there just ha ha ha, and it's like they're all going. And typical bromance type stuff, like, when you got guys that are friends together and they say some of the most horrendous things to each other, but it's hilarious and they're both laughing. It's not like they're offended or anything, but then they'll have guests on that they're just like, you gotta listen to it. They're both stand-up comedians, but their dynamic is nuts. Like, Bert is all over the place, and then Tom is like level-headed, even keel. Like, he talks like this, right? He's just talking. And Bert's just like all over the place. Oh my goodness, I gotta get blah, 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 blah. But it's like you get these two guys in a room and they get on a particular topic. Like, look up the Kool-Aid episode. Two Bears, One Cave Kool-Aid. You should Google that. And then
I'm ready to.
Yeah, just to give you an idea. I mean, it must have been like just 10 minutes of just straight laughing. I mean, they couldn't. You know how when you laugh so hard, you start like you can't breathe, like that. It's funny. Every once in a while, I treat myself, and I'm like, I'm gonna go watch these guys because I need to laugh at somebody.
I love it. That's amazing. Yeah, for me, I love music. So there's a couple. There's one. It gets behind the set list, and they bring on the artists, and they talk. The guys on this show are so knowledgeable about music. They seem to know more about the music than the guest, who's the actual artist. And they bring up like this, okay, you were in, I don't know, Montreal, and your set list for the night was this. Why did you start with that song? And you can hear the guy like, the artist like, oh, wow. Or like, what's the thought behind this song and how did this happen? And you get to hear how somebody crafts a show from a set list perspective. And as a musician, I'm like, this is so cool because you get it behind the scenes about crafting a great show, and how you build the audience and everything. And I'm just like, and then they talk about the music and the fact that this song is, we never do this song because we can never agree on whether or not we like it. It's like, but then the crowd asked for it and we do it anyway. So it's just so cool to kind of get you behind the scenes with somebody that you might never have a chance to hear from. And I just love kind of just nerding out and listening. And the beauty for me is I get to just unplug. Like, I'm not technically learning a new skill or any of that stuff. I'm just having fun and enjoying this podcast. So there's so much variety out there. You can start a podcast about anything and you'll have an audience. Really.
Oh, you can.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you look at Reddit, I mean, there's a ton of shows out there. I've been seeing more posts lately where they're like, hey, I got a podcast about, and it's just some obscure thing. It's like, there's a podcast for that? I mean, it's not for me, but there's some really cool podcasts out there where it's like, that's so niche.
Yeah.
That's so cool, but they're building an audience. They're forming a really tight-knit ecosystem around themselves of diehard fans. And yeah, I mean, going back to what you said before about what trends are happening with podcasts, I think that's it. I think the future of podcasting isn't necessarily, I got to get 100,000 downloads a day, a second, to make a lot of money. It's like, well, if you surround yourself with the right people that want to support you financially, that's where the money's going to come from. So it's different. It's a different MO for building a podcast, but it's amazing. It's amazing how effective it can be.
Have you heard from your audience in the past? Have they reached out and given you feedback and connected with you? And if so, how did that feel?
They have every once in a while, and it's always been positive, even if it's got a little bit of constructive criticism. It's like, hey, they're not reaching out just to say, well, your show sucks, I can't believe it. It's like, hey, I like your show. Have you thought about X? Have you considered Y? And it's like, that's really cool. But also the people that I'm finding I'm getting the most feedback from are from the guests themselves. So when I invite somebody into my world, my ecosystem, have them as a guest on my show, I am taking lots of notes about them as a person. And I take notes like crazy. Like if somebody tells me they're into kayaking or they're into crocheting or they're a grandma or they love coffee or they went to Brazil for 2 years. I mean, these are all notable things that I can write down about them because that helps me really understand more about them as a person. And it also gives me some reasons to reach back out to them in the future. So we're building this relationship together. And whether it's a guest or it's a listener, part of the audience, there's like a 90% chance that we're going to be in each other's circles for a while for many reasons. It's almost like people become more real as a side effect of it. Kind of went on a tangent there. Didn't actually answer your question. Because you were asking about the listeners, and then I'm like, yeah, I'm going to talk about the guests, but, people are people.
Yeah, and the one thing that, like, when I going back to interviews, the one podcast I mentioned, Living the Next Chapter, when I have somebody come on as for a pre-interview and then have them on as a recording as a guest, I'm actually potentially speaking directly to my listener because the podcast is for authors and they're an author. So I know they're going to hopefully, most likely listen to their own episode, a portion of it or something, right? Mm-hmm. So I get a chance to talk to my listener directly. And that is one listener at a time, one episode at a time, one guest at a time. I'm helping to build my audience. And that's a solid connection between two people that I didn't pay Facebook to find me, a follower. I didn't put any money out like that to buy a listener. I spoke to my listener and we became friends. And I find that to be a more genuine way for me to build an audience, one person at a time, instead of looking for the 100,000 downloads on day one, like you mentioned.
Yeah. Well, and to your point as well, the chances of you having somebody else be on your show that fits an ideal profile. Like if you build a podcast, and this is for the listeners too, this goes back to the squishy human brain stuff, right? People tend to group together that are similar. I tend to hang around people that are similar to me in some way. I'm hanging around Dave here because we're both podcasters. We have something in common. And when you have somebody on, and then when you ask them later on, hey, can you share this with people? That information is going to get shared to people that are like them. And actually, social media algorithms are much the same way. I mean, every platform's job, doesn't matter if it's TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, LinkedIn, all of them, their sole purpose in life is to capture as much brains and attention and eyeballs and thumbs and ears as possible, right? And so to keep you on the platform, we'll use TikTok as an example because I think it's got an amazing algorithm. It's going to show you stuff that is going to resonate with you. It's going to show you stuff from people that are similar to you in some fashion, right? So if you're into duck hunting, you probably either lingered on or you tapped the heart button on something that has to do with duck hunting. Well, there's a higher chance that you're going to see stuff about ducks, stuff about hunting, stuff about, game, wildlife, fish, whatever, and you're more likely to resonate with that content. Well, people are the same way. You're probably going to resonate with content that's coming from people that are a lot like you in some way, and that leads to you having more listeners that fit that ideal profile. So, yeah, in a way, it's like, yeah, you kind of got to trust the algorithm, but also we have algorithms in our heads, too, that you can play into. It's weird. I used to think we had free will. I'm starting to wonder if we do. We're all like predisposed to do things a certain way.
It's awesome. So when you hear back from your audience as well, I put SpeakPipe on my website, which is a audio thing where you can leave a voice message, and you get an email with the attachment, and you can listen to it or download it. And then I take that audio message and I put it into a podcast. So I have Christina, Rachel, and Paolo, who have all three of them have reached out to talk about the podcast and thank me for the podcast. It's kind of nice to hear a voice, right? And when you first do your first few episodes, you have an idea of who your audience is. But when your audience actually sends a message and reaches out to you, now when I get on the microphone and record something, I'm thinking of Christina, Rachel, and Paolo because I know their names. And I think the biggest thing that I heard back when I talked to Rachel was I used her message in a podcast episode. I asked people to go check out her new podcast and encourage her to continue going with us, a new podcaster. But then I did a bonus episode where I brought the message back in, and then I grabbed her trailer and I built a little episode around her, and just to promote her episode. It's just a bonus episode. And she called me back, kind of partly laughing, partly crying, that she was so impressed that somebody actually cared to do something to promote her, that she was blown away. And she's in Australia. She had no idea. She's like, I can't believe you did that. And but that's something that I love to be able to do is to inspire others, encourage others, connect people. And I just find that podcasting is such a great way to make all that happen and build real relationships with people on the microphone, on camera, in a truck, and just have this relationship that you can develop over time. And whether you have one encounter with somebody or multiple encounters with people, there's a reason why certain people are put in your life at a certain time to encourage them or for them to encourage you. And I just think that a podcast is a great way. If you're thinking of starting one, it's a great way to build a relationship and build a community and some connections that you never know how those connections will come back and serve you in the past, in the future. And you don't know how you can help somebody. So if you're thinking, you're on the fence, you're like, I'm not sure if I have the voice for it. I don't know if I have Michael's voice or Michael's pickup truck studio. I don't know if I can do this. Just think of who you can connect with and who you can build relationships with and start. And I have an idea of a question for you, Michael. If you were helping somebody start a podcast and they came to you and they have their very beginning stage and they want to record episode 1 or the trailer, whatever you want to say, would you encourage them just to start and get better, or would you encourage them to practice and then release an episode in the future after they've had a chance to practice? What do you think?
Oh, yeah, I would definitely say just start, because one of the most encouraging things is when you can look back, like let's say after your 100th episode and you're like, I wonder what it was like. Like, I remember doing the first episode, but when you can look back and be like, yo, that was pretty rough, right? And you can look and see what you sound like now and what the quality of the episodes and the things you've learned along the way. See, I used to run distance back in high school. I had a coach in cross country. We used to run distance, and every once in a while he'd make us run up some really long hills. And when you run up a hill like that, you're like, you just kind of look at your feet because you don't want to see how far you've gone. And when you get close to the top, you can feel it kind of let off. You can look behind you and see how far you've actually come. It may not seem like you've come far when you get up there, but it's like, dang, man, that was a lot. And building a podcast is like that. When you look at your first episode and it's rough, it's always rough, okay? You can see how far you've come. But also the other thing too is, I would say, before you record your first episode, record it for your ideal listener, whoever it is that you for sure want to have be on your show, like listening to it. And then find the guests from the kind of people that you want to have. Your best listeners are often your best guests, right? And those two things have really helped me. It's like I'm not even focused. When I do a podcast episode, I'm not even really focused on the podcast itself. I know that might sound counterintuitive, but my focus is, how can I build an awesome relationship with this person I have on the show? The tool I use is the podcast, but I want to build that relationship with a person. When I focus on the podcast, it's like, that's kind of like you're focused too close. It's like, what's the furthest thing out there? What are you really, like, what's the overall goal? And when you have that in mind, when you have your eyes on the horizon, podcasts just happen. And before you know it, you'll have done like 500 episodes and met 500 awesome people. So that's my advice. But yeah, definitely start. Don't wait and be like, well, I got to get good. I got to take a public speaking course. I got to get. No, just start. You'll learn as you go. You'll learn some amazing things as you go.
And people love to follow along on the journey. I remember Michael's first episode. I was there. I was a listener, and I've been here with Michael through all of the episodes, and I've seen him grow. And he responded when I reached out and gave him a suggestion. He actually answered me. Like, I have a connection with Michael. I feel like when I meet you in person, you're the same person that's on the microphone. You're not some hey guy that's putting on a show. I can meet you and stand in line with you, or see you at my local truck dealership and go, that's the guy from the podcast. And he's the same guy in real life.
Yeah.
Wow, imagine that.
Yeah, buying another studio, man.
Imagine that, a real person.
Imagine that. Yeah.
So a great example for that is like my wife's sister in high school had a student in her class, and he was like a complete clown, a complete jokester, never took anything seriously. Actually told his teacher that, I don't need this class because I'm never going to need science where I'm going to be. I'm going to be a famous actor. And everyone laughed, and they're like, yeah, whatever, and he was just that guy, right? The class clown. He turned out that's a guy we kind of know as Jim Carrey. And yes, he doesn't need science. He's doing fine as an actor. And, and the nice thing is you can say, I remember Jim Carrey in my science class. I remember that he was a jokester and that he couldn't focus and that he was focused on his future. And people love to tell the story of, I remember when, ... And they get to follow the journey with you. So by starting, getting your podcast out there, finding your voice, developing, improving, getting better, listening to feedback like we talked about, people will come along on the journey with you and say, I remember when ... about your podcast. And that's the community that will be there for you when you release your next episode, because they have bought into you, right?
Yeah, exactly right. Well, you're hitting on one of the points that it took me a while to learn this, but everybody at a core level, like almost at the core level of our being, we all want to be seen and heard, you know? And even if it's like I was there when, it's like, hey, you're validating the fact that you were there at the beginning. You were there when this thing got started. You were there on the show. You were one of the first, like, single-digit number people that were on the show. You were part of this at the very beginning. People want to be seen and heard. And I think that's one of the things that makes podcasting so potent and so powerful is whether you're watching us or you're listening to us, we are being heard. We're being seen. And for guests that are on your show, they're being seen. They're being heard. Every show you record is one more example of you being seen and heard by who knows how many people. There's 8 billion humans on the planet. The right people are going to hear you at the right time for the right reason. So, yeah, don't wait. Just start. Don't worry about getting it right, because often we are our own worst critics. I know I'm not only the president, I'm also a client kind of thing, right? I would beat myself up and be like, oh, it's not good enough, it's not good enough. And then I'd have people be like, that was freaking amazing. How did you do this? I'm like, I just got the microphone out and started talking, but thanks. And after a while, you realize you're like, I do have worth. I do have knowledge. I know stuff. I've got a story to share. By God, I'm going to share it. And the rest is history. It may sound like pompous, arrogant. I promise it's not. It's just everybody's got value. Everybody's got a story. So get out there and share it. Go team.
Michael, for the listener who's just started their podcast, they've got a few episodes, maybe 10, maybe 4, whatever. They're getting small listen numbers back. They're feeling a little bit deflated because they thought they would be a big success right out of the gate. What would you say to them to encourage them to keep going, to keep showing up for their audience? I'm curious to hear how you would speak to them and spur them forward.
I would say it's perfectly okay and highly advised to spoon feed people. And what I mean by that is, if you just recorded an episode, whatever the topic is about, you probably have a particular person in mind that you think would really enjoy hearing that episode. So, like, let's say you've got a variety podcast where you're talking to a bunch of business owners, all different sectors, all different experience levels, and you've got one person that started a vet agency, like a veterinarian practice, and you know a couple of vets that you think would really get a kick out of this show. Maybe there's something funny or some piece of trivia or whatever that is like, Dr. So-and-so would really like this. Send them a link to the episode. Let them hear it. And the more you do this, A, you've just built a little bit more of a relationship with the Dr. So-and-so that you already know. But B, you're helping promote a little bit of a relationship between the doctor you know and the doctor you just met on the show. The more you do that, and the more you expose a variety of people to your podcast, the more likely they're going to keep listening. Because they just listened to this first episode, maybe they're going to listen to another one. But it's perfectly okay, and I think I'm going to make kind of an obscure reference here. I'm going to change a little bit of the answer, but I always look for reasons to reach out, okay? Here in the U.S., do you guys have Scooby-Doo up there? You know who Scooby-Doo is?
Oh, yeah. Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, because I didn't know if it was just an American thing, or it's like, no, it stops at North Dakota. It doesn't go that far north, eh? So you know how Scooby-Doo, exactly. Well, you know how Scooby-Doo is like rut-row all the time? That's what I call a reason to reach out. I call them a rut-row. And you can find Rut Rows all the time, and if you have a reason to reach out to somebody and it happens to be, hey, I got a podcast episode that I think you in particular would really enjoy, you'd get something out of this, give it to them. That's one more listener. The more you do that, if you do that 10 times a day, every day, to 10 different people, and you do that for 300 days out of the year, that's 30,000 new listens. I think. No. 3,000. Can't math. The math ain't mathin'. It's Monday. So that'd be 3,000 new listens, new people that were like, whoa, you got a podcast? What? Mm-hmm. That's huge. That's a lot higher than 4, you know?
And I had somebody reach out to me and they said, Dave, I have my podcast. I've had 20 consistent listeners and I just wanted it to be more. You know, I put a lot of work into this. I'm paying for it. I'm not making any money. But there's 20 people who show up for me every episode. And I said to them, now imagine you walked up to a platform or up to a podium and a microphone. You looked out over the room and there's 400 seats, but there's 20 people. Would you walk up to the microphone and go, oh, it's only 20 people here. Well, that's not really worth my time. I'm going to leave. And the 20 people are like, we've been here waiting for you. We have questions and we want to meet you and get an autograph or some time with you and talk to you. We love your stuff. We've been following every episode. Would you really say to 20 people that, oh, it's not the number I wanted, so I'm not going to do this anymore? You have 20 people who are showing up for you.
Yeah.
Celebrate the small. Yeah. Celebrate it. You can connect with 20 people better than 400. You can get into their lives. You can talk to them and encourage them.
Absolutely.
And respond to their messages like you talked about. You can do all those things when you're small and do it well and build your base of your community so that when you do have more success down the road, if that happens, great. But you have the 20 who keep coming back. And I know there's a core base that come to this podcast. And thank you for doing that, by the way. Celebrate the small and be happy with one listen. That's one person who could have been on Netflix, could have been on social media, could have been watching a movie, could have been out walking their dog, doing something else. They stopped and came to you. In the busyness of this world, they found you. Celebrate the small. That's kind of my big thing.
That's absolutely right. I think that's the new wave of podcasting. I think small is good. I think small, tight-knit communities of people that are like, you know, you got 20 people and 100% of them are willing to pay you $5 a month. That's $100 a month.
Yeah.
You know, that's huge though. I mean, the ability, if people are willing to share financial energy with you, that says something. That says something. And sometimes people are like, yeah, I've got 100,000 listens. And it's like, well, how much money are you getting from those people? Probably none. If you're getting paid, it's probably from sponsors who are only paying you for access to their ears, those people. But if you've got people that are willing to support you financially, that is huge. That is huge. So little goes a long way. Little goes a long way.
All right, Michael, you've been so kind with your time there in Studio 150. Before we close off, I have a question for you, but before that, let's talk about your podcast quick. Let's promote that. Send people your way. How do we find you and your podcast?
Awesome. Well, I do have a podcast. It's called The Third Wave with Fritz. And the premise of the podcast is, how do we use this medium as a way to build business? And so I have a high concentration of business owners, entrepreneurs, founders, and coaches on as guests. And what I do is, after the show, I take furious notes during the show. So if you're on as a guest and you see my camera wiggling, I just got heavy hands and fat fingers. And I'm taking notes, but I'm writing down a lot of key information. I come back later with a detailed playbook. Whether you have a podcast already or you don't and you're thinking about starting one, I'm going to show you some key tactics on how to get the most out of it that help you have a podcast that can draw in business for your business. Draw in business for your business. I need to change it up a little bit. Anyway, stop by podcastify.me, and up at the top, there's an option that says guest on our podcast. That's where you go if you want to apply. Be sure to say that Dave Campbell sent you.
I love it. That's great.
It's Dave's fault that I'm here. So,
or secret password Studio 150. That's another way to get
that's right.
behind the scenes access right there.
Yeah.
Okay. Michael, thank you for being part of the podcast. Before I let you go, one last question.
Okay.
Can you please tell us about this amazing thing that your daughter has made that has already sold? And I want to promote her. This is a great idea. And I haven't heard anybody do this. So I would love for you to promote this amazing new product that will be available on podcastify.me.
Yep.
Come on, please tell me more.
All right. Well, the mic that you love to hate, the Blue Yeti, we now offer an aftermarket addition to it. We actually have a pop filter. It's a handmade pop filter. My daughter Amelia, she's 11. For now, if this airs after May 26th, then that's going to be a big fat lie. But she makes these. She makes them out of yarn, and then she puts this, it's kind of a real fuzzy, like I guess when it's all done, it looks like what's known as a dead cat filter. And it just goes right over top of the microphone head, and it keeps the pop-popness and stuff like that from coming through. And I would have had one, but I sold one already. The one that I had to a guy. Sold it to John Feldman in Florida. And he's an awesome guy. Had him on as a podcast guest, and I told him what I was doing, and he's like, dude, I'm going to get one of those. I'm like, are you serious? Yes. He's like, listed on the website. I'm going to buy it. I'm like, okay. So we sell them for $35. They're handmade. Takes her probably a few hours to make. And 100% of the proceeds go to her. She's starting a small business. All of our girls have an entrepreneurial streak. I have no idea where they get that from. No idea. But yeah, stop by podcastify.me, click services, and then scroll down to fun stuff. That's where you'd find it.
I love it. I love it. It's so amazing. What a great thing. So yeah, if you have the most amazing microphone in the world, the Blue Yeti, and I just made a bunch of podcast gurus go, oh my gosh, to the heart. If you have, what is going on? Who are these people?
Unsubscribe.
First of all, I just want to remind everybody that this podcast was recorded on Michael's side with the Blue Yeti, and he sounds friggin' awesome. It's so amazing. I love it. I love it. So I just love that we're making podcast gurus bang their head right now that yes, it is possible to use the equipment you have and do what you're doing so well. So Michael, thank you. Please go and support Michael and this amazing new product. And I hope you learn how to crochet. But you have to do them too. So this sounds really great. Thank you, Michael, for being part of the podcast. I hope to have you back again, to have the conversation again, because you brought so much great wisdom and insight. Truly, I'm so happy to have you here. I'm so glad we connected.
I appreciate it, man. It's been fun. It's been fun. I love this. I'll just say I loved it. You're an awesome dude, man. I hope I can come back again soon.
I need to know, Michael, what color is the truck?
It's white. Yeah.
Wait, okay, there you go. I just had to know, because I can only see the inside.
Yeah.
I got to know. Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Michael. From Studio 150, with 4 wheels and a steering wheel. Michael, thank you so much for being part of the podcast.
Appreciate it. Thank you.